Belize is subject to several types of hazards. Perhaps the best known hazard that we face every year is a threat from hurricanes and tropical storms. But there are also other hazards that we are faced with, such as the floods and during the dry season, the risk for heat waves, as we are currently experiencing now, and isolated incidents of droughts and threat from tsunamis. Those are the major hazards that affect Belize.
Belize, being one of the carbon sinks, was ranked 8th out of 167 countries for climate risk, and its geographical location makes the country and its people extremely vulnerable to hydrometeorological hazards, particularly hurricanes, storm surge, and flash flooding, which affects the entire low-lying coastal line, where approximately 35% of the population is densely located. This vulnerability is further worsened by climate change. This risk has become ever more present to its government and its people over the last 3 years, when Belize experienced extreme flooding from Hurricane Eta, Iota, Nana in 2020, and then in 2022, when a Category 1 hurricane impacted the country by damaging properties and affecting livelihoods. The recent climate outlook predicts an El Niño phenomenon in the Atlantic Basin, with reports indicating that it is warm as during the warmest part of the year, and is possibly as hot as the previous year where there was an El Niño forecast.
The last 8 to 10 years have been regarded as some of the hottest years in terms of worldwide records. Climate change studies do suggest we're going to continue with hotter temperatures and not as cool nighttime temperatures if the climate change scenarios that the scientists look at are likely to continue.
Belize is experiencing intense heat and heat waves for extended periods in the rainy season, and is expected to peak later this year and progress well into the following wet season.
Belize has 2 seasons. We have what's called a wet season and what's called the dry season. The dry season generally runs from November through to the early part of May. And during the dry season, the temperatures tend to be rather hot, with the highest temperatures occurring mainly in the months of April and May. So the combination of temperature and high humidity contributes to the heat stress, which is what's affecting us right now.
As the heat is predicted to persist within the coming months, the direct and indirect impact on the population is a concern for both government and humanitarian actors.
Once the air temperature rises above 40 degrees Celsius, you're at risk for a heat stroke. It makes you uncomfortable, and if you are faced with a health condition, chronic illness, a heat wave complicates your whole health and well-being. So capacity to do work for long hours is limited. And ultimately, if you're not careful about managing heat as a stressor, it can kill you.
Disaster mitigation and response plans are primarily focused on hurricanes and flash floods, yet the implication of an El Niño forecast have been underexplored in Belize. As emergency actors try to understand and prepare for an El Niño phenomenon, recognizing what the implications are for the country and its people, particularly children, who are often the most vulnerable to climate and environmental risk, is of chief importance.
Children are susceptible to the effects of heat waves. Children tend to be very active, and if measures aren't taken to keep them hydrated, they can succumb to heat stress as much as elderly people. So the very young and the very old are very susceptible to the effects of heat waves.
Protracted heat waves are directly related to reduced productivity in teachers and learning ability in children, especially in non-conditioned classrooms or in schools without proper ventilation and outdoor shade to protect the students from the direct heat.
In parts of Belize City where there are lots of buildings, those parts of the city will also be extremely hot because buildings tend to trap heat. When you construct a building, it's very important to be conscious of the prevailing winds in siting your building. All these things contribute to how comfortable a building's infrastructure is going to make for personnel.
The heat waves also have implications on children in their homes, as parents are susceptible to heat stress. Increased irritability and aggression due to the lack of sleep and heat discomfort can trigger poor decision-making when it comes to disciplinary measures. The heat waves can also have implications on public health service, as humid heat is likely to increase biological risks, such as mosquito-borne diseases like dengue. The heat can also lead to strained healthcare system, as it can cause an increase in mild heat symptoms, fainting episodes, and hospitalization of adults and children where extended exposure to heat goes unaddressed. The labor sector is also at risk to heat implications, as excessive heat is directly linked to reduced productivity in labor performance and increased exhaustion if persons go unprotected.
The DOE recognizes that heavy metals and other chemicals are found in objects that Belizeans handle daily. For example, lead in paint, mercury in light bulbs or thermometers, arsenic in wood products, and persistent organic pollutants in upholstery material and plastics. We do believe that exposure is high, but scientific data for Belize is lacking. Data concerning exposure of children to heavy metals and impacts to the environment is very limited due to the lack of infrastructure and technology for testing of heavy metals. One of the good news is that persistent organic pollutant pesticides are not manufactured in Belize. Most pesticides are prohibited for importation and use in Belize, except for a few that have restricted importation and use designation under the Stockholm Convention, such as DDT. Recently, polychlorinated biphenyls and industrial POPs were identified in electrical transformers at the facility of one of the electrical power generators in Belize. Highly hazardous pesticides are reported in Belize as restricted use only. The use of highly hazardous pesticides is regulated by the Pesticides Control Board, who provides training for handling and use to prevent exposure to people and contamination of the environment. An application license is required by law to use highly hazardous pesticides in Belize. Under a recent regional project on the sound management of persistent organic pollutants, an assessment was conducted in Belize and Kaya districts regarding medical waste management and final disposal. It was determined that most medical waste generated by both private and public sectors are disposed via open burning, thus contributing to release of unintentional POPs. A small percentage is collected by a private company for disposal via high-temperature incineration. However, open burning of medical waste is a serious environmental problem that exposes humans to UPOPs. Scientific evidence shows that long-term exposure to certain chemicals, even at low levels of POPs, can lead to cancer risks, reproductive disorders, alteration to the immune system, endocrine disruption, genotoxicity, and increased birth defects. To safeguard our populace and the global community, Belize has signed onto several chemical conventions, including the Stockholm Convention on POPs, the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and the Rotterdam Convention on Prior Informed Consent. In so doing, Belize is actively involved in taking necessary measures to manage and eliminate these harmful substances that affect everyone, but most so our vulnerable population, our children, women, and the elderly.
UNICEF has begun the process of developing key messages to the public through the Beat the Heat campaign and is collaborating with key environmental actors to champion this initiative. An assessment on the impact on the environment on children, inclusive of medical waste, industrial waste, and heat, will be instrumental in identifying the long-term impacts of climate change. Findings from the report will undoubtedly help to support the government with key actions to achieve an integrated approach to the protecting of children from climate and environmental threats and hazards.